Welcome to another episode of Life and Whiskey. As always, I'm Jordan, and today we are going to look at Wild Turkey, kind of the original. They're 81 proof. A lot of people are familiar with the 101, but this is their 81 proof, which I think will serve us quite well. It is just a Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey, 40.5% ABV, so 81 proof. Distilled and bottled by Wild Turkey Distilling, Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. So, let's get into this bottle. And then this will be story number 3. So my third attempt at trying to get an elk with my bow this year, which was not easy. So on the nose, I get a really heavy cherry and a little bit of corn dust in there. That cherry nose is dominating. It's a really light, fruity cherry. Flash of oak, but man, cherry. Just lots and lots of cherry. So nothing outside of the realm of normal when it comes to bourbon. This is exactly what you would expect. Also, Wild Turkey being one of the more well-known brands. Okay, so on the palate, extremely simple, extremely light, especially coming off that Douglas and Todd from the last video. That was 93 proof, I think, but a little bit higher ethanol. This drink's a little more watery. It also doesn't have the viscosity to it. But simple, light, just cherry, a sweet vanilla, oak tannin, black pepper, hint of ethanol. And that's about all there is to say about it, really. It doesn't really open up. It doesn't really change a whole lot. Just real light on flavor. The cherry's pretty solid up front, so this is a pretty cherry heavy flavored bourbon. I don't really get that corn dust that I can smell in the nose. And as far as the barrel, I get the barrel just a little bit on the end, but really it's mostly cherry in flavor also. That cherry is really dominant just kind of all the way around. Black pepper spice on the end picks up a bit. The ethanol burn is more there than the black pepper actually as far as the heat of it all. A little bit dry in the finish, but not a whole lot. Just a very simple but easy drinking bourbon. Again, at 81 proof, it's just above the floor of 80, but that extra 1% or half a percent's not really adding a whole lot to it. But it is, if you're looking for a classic bourbon flavors, not really expensive. It's definitely a good one to go to. Sorry, I'm just looking up the price here. I should probably do this stuff ahead of time, but such is life. So they're Wild Turkey 81, $17.99 here in Wyoming. So, just some people would call it a budget, but a lower price bourbon, but a nice bourbon for what you're paying for it. Highly recommend it. I'm a fan of some of the other Wild Turkey products. If anybody's been paying attention, their Long Branch, that's probably my new favorite go-to bourbon right now. It's only $35 here in Wyoming, so it's awesome. And come on, anything endorsed by Matthew McConaughey, how can you go wrong, right? But I'm going to be bringing a bottle of that on our Antelope Hunt, which is coming up soon. But Wild Turkey 81, good one to go with. Okay, so installment number 3 of my elk hunting adventures. So, first 2 elk hunts, going all the way across the state to an area that I hunt, have hunted the last couple of years. So on installment number 3, knew I wasn't going to be able to get away for an extended period of time. In fact, I was really only able to get away for one day. And so I hunted the mountains here where I live, and it was my first time ever hunting here. I've hiked all over those mountains. I knew where some elk were going to be, but I also knew that I wouldn't be able to pull an elk out if I got one where I knew they would be. Um, so the mountains are really steep canyons, deep canyons, couple thousand feet here and there, and I kind of know what, having packed out a couple of elk now, I know about my physical ability to be able to do that by myself, and of course this would be by myself. Um, I that limited where I could go, and so I found an area in quotations that was flatter, but the rises and falls were only 200-300 feet at a time. If I really pushed it and went out farther back, which I did a couple of times, there was like some 500 to 700 feet foot hills that I would go up. But man, the change in hunting style was so drastic. There's parks. I mean, it's a rifle hunter's paradise, right? So the parks are every hilltop, ridgetop had just giant, wide open parks that were several hundred yards wide. The timber, you could see 100 yards through the timber. The dark, deep, thick, nasty timber at its worst, you could see 30 or 40 yards still. I mean, it's just completely different from where I had hunted before. And same outcome though. The elk were not bugling this day when I went out. I thought I heard a bugle right, like 20 minutes before first light, but the wind was ripping about 20-30 miles an hour that I couldn't really tell. And as is the case for most people, you hear that bugle most of the time. It's always like right on the edge of your hearing ability. Like, did I really hear something, or is my mind playing tricks on me? Especially in the dark, it's kind of hard to tell. So I wasn't positive, and nothing was responding back to me for my calls. So because of that, I kind of made a mental note of it, but didn't put a lot of stock in it. And I knew I couldn't really pinpoint where it was. So I had made a game plan for that morning based on which way the wind was supposed to be coming from, or forecasted to be coming from, I should say. And so I just stuck to my plan. And man, I hunted hard. I hunted hard all day, and I thought I got into some elk in the morning. Turns out there were some hunters, but I'm not convinced that there wasn't elk between me and the other hunters, even though we were only 60, 70 yards apart. And the reason why I know there was other hunters is because I ended up like 5 hours later running into those hunters again and talking to them a little bit, and we're like, oh yeah, that was me and this. And turns out I'm really good at calling in hunters, because I had called them in the second time as well, and talked to them, and they said they had been there. So this was the second week that this zone was open, and it was a Wednesday, and it had opened up the previous Monday. And the guy said, man, opening week, every campsite was full. There was a hunter behind every tree. He said the number of people that were in here was just unbelievable. And he said everyone he talked to, no elk, hadn't seen anything, hadn't heard anything. He was a local, same as myself. And I just drove up in the morning. I got up at like 4:30, drove up the mountain. Took about an hour. Got up there with about an hour till daylight, and then was just planning on driving home. He was actually camping up there, and he said hasn't heard anything at night. Several of his friends were in other zones on the mountain and were in various areas around the mountain. He said nobody had really been seeing or hearing anything. So again, kind of the same story that I got from every other hunter that I talked to, no matter what state they were in. I know people have gotten into elk, and this year has been a dream season for some people, but the average person, I think, has kind of experienced the same thing. And I'm wondering if it is just that human presence out in the mountains all summer long. This COVID thing had the trailheads just packed with people every day, all day. And I think that really had something to do with it. That's the best I can figure, because as far as like dry or hot or whatever, like the weather conditions didn't really play much with it. There was a full moon on opening week, but this was already, I think when I went out that day, it was the new moon, so it was darker than dark, and still nothing. So, like I said, I thought I heard one bugle in the morning, but only one, and I couldn't really tell for certain. Um, Spent the day walking around, bumped a couple moose, some deer. The winds were just swirling all over the place. Kind of was My goal was to get out of the woods right about 6 o'clock, because I thought, or at least stop hunting at 6, because if I hadn't shot anything by 6 gives me an hour of daylight left, and I thought, well, if I shoot something and then have to track it and then have to, quarter it and whatever else. I mean, it would be like, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock before I even got out the first time off the mountain. And I was already, pounding on the miles and pretty exhausted at that point, as it was fairly warm. So I was coming out, I'm like a quarter mile and a couple hundred vertical feet from the truck, and I'm calling nothing, and then I just see a bull running through the timber about 100 yards in front of me. Best I can figure, I'm calling. He's either coming or aware of my presence, looks, sees a hunter, bolts. Um, I'm not a big fan of the wide open country, I've come to decide, because as I'll tell you in the next story and in this story, vision, elk can see you a long ways off, and when you can see through the woods and it's nothing but wide open and clear, it can be a huge disadvantage when you're expecting to hear a bugle or a call of some sort, to be able to hone in, pick a position that the animal will be at, and then work that position. Well, without having any noise, I mean, you'd literally have to just sit there and glass through the woods, which means you're not moving very far, very fast, and you don't get to cover the ground that you'd want. And I'm not very good at it, to top it off. I like to go, 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 and when I hear something, then I make a play, right? So he blows out. I try and get after him. Nothing. The wind was completely in my favor at that point, so I know he didn't smell me. Of course, when elk takes off, you have no chance of catching them. Tried to follow his trail a little bit and made my best play on best guess which way he went. Had to let him go. So kept working around the ridge. That was at 5. Started working around the ridge a little bit more, like a couple hundred yards down the ridge. Same thing. I see 2 blow out. I could see one was a raghorn, like a 4-point or a 5-point. I don't know what the other one was. They kind of go up and over this ridge, and on the other side of this ridge where they were headed is a creek bottom at the base of the hill where the truck is. So there's like a ridge and then a creek bottom, and then up the hill, and the truck's parked up here. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I can get one down in that ridge. So I circled around the nose of the ridge where they went over. I went around, got the wind in my favor best I could, because the wind was coming down. Called a couple times. Well, they had gone down the ridge, across a feeder creek, and up, and he bugled from up on top of that ridge, and this was like 6, pushing 6. And so I farted around with him for a bit, and he bugled once from like mid slope. He bugled a second time from a little bit, a couple hundred yards further upslope. So he was moving away from me. I made a mad dash best I could to kind of get close. Called a couple more times. I could hear him and smell him, but he wasn't coming down the slope at all. And I didn't have the energy or the time to start chasing him upslope further away from the truck. And as I was calling, I hear another hunter calling and walking in on me. And the hunter, it sounded like the worst duck call you ever heard. Not very good at calling. He's coming in on me. Finally gets into where I am, and I kind of flag him down and go, hey, I'm standing here. But I walk up to him. I'm like, hey, last I knew he was, 200 yards upslope. He's all yours if you want to go after him, because I got to get out of here. I started walking back to the truck, and I thought, if he goes up to him, that bull, he might bump him up and over that ridge, and all I got to do is circle around. So held topo, went around the ridge, set up shop for about 15, 20 minutes, thinking maybe he'd bump him, because I could still hear the guy calling as he went up the ridge. And it didn't come to fruition, and so I ended up pulling stakes and headed back to the truck and calling it a night. Came down the mountain, and that was episode number 3. Just a one-day quick out, new territory. Learned a lot. There was elk sign all over the place. I mean, if you looked at this area, you would think there was several hundred animals running the area. There wasn't a whole lot of fresh scat, but the rubs and the wallows and the trails that are this wide and this deep, just beat into the ground all over the place. I would have expected to see a lot more, but having heard about how much pressure there was the week before, those elk definitely could have got pushed out of there and somewhere else. And because this was kind of the only accessible area for me, that I knew I'd be able to pull something out of it had I shot something, I was kind of limited. So episode number 4 also takes place same exact location. We'll talk about that in the next video. But that was how it went. So swirling winds and elk that weren't really talking very much, and now adding to the equation wide open woods and parks where animals can see a long ways, kind of plaguing me for that particular hunt and hunters. So there's that. So Wild Turkey 81, good budget whiskey, high in cherry notes. By all means, oh, there's that corn dust again. Go ahead, pick up a bottle. Let me know what you think, what you can find it for in your area by you. Drop it in the comments below. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do so. I'd greatly appreciate it. Let me know what it is you'd like to see for content. I'm going to keep going with these brief, I guess, stories or briefings on what happened this elk season during archery elk, leading into our next hunt, which is going to be an antelope hunt, which neither my wife nor I have tags, but my dad, my brother, and my buddy all have tags. So we're going to go with, just for fun, I still have deer tags and elk tags that need to be filled, which I may, if I'm super lucky, which I tend not to be able to fill on our antelope hunt as well, all in the same area. But because it's a prairie thing, I don't think I'm going to get an elk, but I might get a deer. So that's where that's going to go. But stay tuned for installment number 4 and my 4th attempt at trying to get an elk with my bow, which is my 4th and final attempt for archery elk season 2020. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next video.